Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and recently I've been going through a bunch of specs and classes, taking a look a second time at them with some of the different builds that people have come up with, trying to figure out how they play in Shadowlands so far. With the game only 2 months away, I think it's now a good time to start looking critically at a bunch of different specs. In this video, I want to really spotlight Enhancement Shaman. Where has this spec been at? Quite a lot of you guys have been asking and wondering, is Enhancement any good? Is Enhancement any good? Is it finally good? Is it going to be possible for me to play Enhancement, maybe even get into dungeons and into raids? In this video, I want to alleviate you guys with some of those questions. I want to let you know where Enhancement is right now, some of the stuff that I noticed for it, some of the different builds I was able to find how to play as just one spec, and some of the joy that I had playing this spec in particular. So this is early beta. We don't know what the numbers are going to be like. For now, everything is just being tuned regularly, and Blizzard is going to do the final tuning numbers at the end. For Enhancement Shaman, I feel like with the numbers, it all is going to come down to on the viability of how they play in the content for dungeons, raids, even PvP, depending how Blizzard tunes them. So all we have to go off of is the play style, as well as some of the different toolkits and abilities that you bring to your team. And Enhancement Shaman, I think, is actually in a very interesting spot, as the Wind Fury Totem gives you a 20% chance for your party to have an extra auto attack, which is still quite a majority of melee's damage, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. You'll be surprised how many melee have the auto attack as quite a good portion of their dam, especially someone like an arms warrior with a massive chopper doing considerable numbers just from autos. I know that auto attacks don't excite anybody. I mean, that's like a classic World of Warcraft thing at this point. However, having good auto attacks for a class, especially as a melee, means that whether you're doing your rotation properly or not, quite a good portion of your damage will be from the autos themselves. That's just a guaranteed amount of damage, and if Enhancement can abuse that guaranteed amount of damage with the Wind Fury Totem, well, I think in certain compositions, it definitely could have a play. Besides that, it is the one melee class compared to Survival Hunters, Windwalker Monks, and even Rogues that actually brings something to the table, which is different. Of course, Rogues bring Shroud, which is great in dungeons, but when are you going to use Shroud inside of a raid? Yes, monks have Touch of Death and Touch of Karma in order to be able to stand in fire and do damage, but they don't bring anything extra like a gateway for Warlock, Innervate for Balance Druids. Even Warriors and Death Knights bring some sort of a buff or a debuff that the group needs, as well as a raid cooldown, which can also be used in dungeons as well. Mages can bring an intellect buff and a long range interrupt with an ice block, so for a lot of melee it's going to be a question of justifying your position inside of a raid, dungeon, or wherever it may be. However, out of all these other melee classes, Enhancement is still the one spec that actually does bring something completely unique and does promote more melee focused gameplay into the toolkit. I think this is something that Blizzard is going to have to start thinking about right now with Enhancement. Just how strong should this totem be? Because right now it has a pretty decent 20% chance for an auto attack to swing again. There's quite a lot of classes and specs that can get procs off of those autos. That means a two-hand Frost Death Knight can get more Killer Machine procs because it's more auto attack swings. That means as a rogue that's more poison applications, or if you're subtlety, more combo points and energy, which is kind of massive. Besides just the actual autos, it's also procs for certain classes, which can be in some ways exploitive for certain dungeon groups and even raid groups. So the bring something that's worth considering building a comp around. Besides the regular Earthbind Totem, Speed Totem, Stun Totem, Tremor Totem, which is still quite a lot of utility, Purges, which certain racials can't even get, because if you're not Horde, you don't have an AoE Purge like Blood Elves do, and now much better off-healing if, let's say, off-healing is necessary because of Maelstrom weapons. Yes, it means you'll have to sacrifice Maelstrom in order to be able to heal your allies instead of doing damage, but for 1 second to all of a sudden become a Restoration Shaman and bust out a fat chain heal on your allies, I gotta say, that's kind of cool. Another thing that I really like about Enhancement is the fact that on the beta, it absolutely does negative damage. It literally heals the boss, which is not a good thing. But we are in the beta, where damage numbers are going to be tuned, hopefully, but the spec is still super enjoyable to play. It's really difficult to gauge which build will be the best, because I've been trying a bunch of builds and there's been a bit of frustration trying to figure out which one of these builds is going to be the top tier best build for Enhancement, since you can kind of build a bare workshop with this spec. So I'm not amazing in the hands, but there's a couple different builds that I have found. So The first one is going to be Perpetual Wolves. Every time with this legendary, you increase the chance where you get a Maelstrom weapon by 5%. Whenever you gain a stack of Maelstrom weapon, your cooldown of Feral Spirits is reduced by 2 seconds. So you can have Wolves out for quite a bit. So with this playstyle, what did I play? I guess you could play Elemental Assault, so you have a chance to gain Maelstrom weapon by Storm Striking. So let's just start the rotation here with the full setup and all the Storm Strikes to see if we can get ourselves the Maelstrom. And every time we spend a bit of Maelstrom, we are able to reduce the cooldown of our Wolves to the point where we could actually potentially have Wolves out all the time if we get lucky enough with the procs. It looks like we're getting pretty lucky with the procs as is. If we were to, let's say, play this rotation out properly with all the damaging components and everything that's available, then we'll just continue doing everything that we're doing here in order to get Wolves on a, what looks like, I would say maybe, what, 30-second cooldown or something like that. Let's see how fast we can get this time. If we get lucky enough with our Maelstrom generation, then I think we could get super giga lucky. And I guess we could just be spamming Storm Strike and going for the playstyle of Storm Strike in order to get these Wolves as early as possible. But you can see, what is it, 16 seconds? And we got Wolves back at 18 seconds. Okay, let's do it again. We're gonna pop Wolves and go through as many abilities as we can in order to give us Wolves back a little quicker. Wolves are about a 45 seconds, 36 seconds, 30 seconds. So we just need a couple more lucky procs from our melee weapons. So we're using anything that uses weapon damage. And this time the Wolves are about 30 seconds into the playstyle, because we are generating quite a bit of Maelstrom, but not as much. So this time they were about 30 seconds. So let's pop Wolves again. And we'll see if we can do this. Maelstrom coming back, 22 seconds. And the Wolves are back at about 25-second mark. So that was a crazy good wolf build. So you can synergize together with Elemental Wolves, which gives you a shorter cooldown, or you can play it without Elemental Wolves if you want to do so. The Wolves themselves seems to do quite a bit of damage on their own, like the Icy Edge ability with this wolf right here. The Molten Weapon doesn't really proc nearly as much as I want to. The Wolves damage itself does seem to be decent, but it could be like a major pet build. And I wonder what stats you would actually play with this. I guess maybe versatility so that the pets actually did more damage. But that's a fun build where you could just kind of get Wolves out every 30 seconds or so. And what's their duration? Like 15 seconds, isn't it? But maybe you want to play more of the old school, the original Shaman build that you might be playing in BFA, where you're not about really AoE damage. You'd rather just kind of cleave things. But your purpose is to mostly focus down single targets as best as possible. So with this setup and with a legendary where consuming 5 stacks of Maelstrom weapon will reset the cooldown of your Storm Strike, causing the next Storm Strike to deal 100% more damage, will give you a little bit different of a damage split than what you might see in Shadowlands, and damage split that will be very familiar to what you might experience in the current version of BFA Shaman, which I mean that in a good way. So we're going to pop our Wolves, get the everything rolling, get us also Storm Strike into a bunch of Lightning Bolts, and Lightning Bolt Maelstrom into more Storm Strikes, into Lava Bursts or Lava Lashes best we can. We got ourselves more Lightning Bolts, more Storm Strikes. If we need more resources and we got nothing else to press, we will press Crash Lightning. And we'll kind of maintain Earthen Spike at all times. We want to have Earthen Spike for our Maelstrom to use into Lightning Bolts like we're getting here in Chains, and then combining that Maelstrom Lightning Bolt into a Storm Strike almost immediately if that's best possible. So we'll Storm Strike just to make sure we have one. Then we'll reset it. We'll wait until we can have our full setup here. Storm Strike, Lightning Bolt, buff the already existing Storm Strike to do even more damage. Lightning Bolt, back to Storm Strike. Lightning Bolt, back to maybe one more Storm Strike while Earthen Spike was up. Lightning Bolt back. And I mean, that's basically like a 2-button rotation more or less. You can see it just dominates the playstyle. But this one seems to be, like, damage-wise is not, you know, all perfect. But this one seems to be the one that I've been seeing a lot of success in terms of damage. Especially I'm able to combine a reset of a Storm Strike, which is going to do a lot more damage, as well as a Lightning Bolt right after into it. Combine the buff together into a very fatty Storm Strike. And then you get Wolves up and running only on 2-minute cooldown. So every 2 minutes you can just go back to this chain over and over. And the funny part is my damage rotation never really like amps. It never really gets stronger. I never just really just start doing lots of damage out of nowhere. I'm really just doing the same damage, the same rotation, same playstyle at all times. So it's almost like a playstyle for Enhancement Shaman where you're not ever really bursting, but you're just constantly doing very aggressive amounts of damage almost at all times, and it's quite a lot of fun. It's quite fantastic, honestly. I mean, it's kind of like a silly build, as you can see. Most of my rotation is just between just a few buttons, and it's a lot of like things really happening. I'm actually kind of almost like struggling to find words to explain the build and the playstyle, just because it's so quick. It just comes at you fast, and I don't have the amazing gear that, let's say, somebody from doing some of the raids have, but the amount of damage you can do just for a back-to-back in a very cleave oriented setting in a dungeon, it translates really well. You know what else is fun about the Enhancement Shaman? The fact that you can actually kind of have a themed build. We don't know if this is actually going to be a good build or not, but it potentially could be. What if you wanted to play a very fire-oriented build? You played the lightning, you played the wolf summons, now you want to do a little bit of fire damage. It could potentially be good. So with the legendary of where your flame shock ticks, increase the damage of a lava lash by 10% until like 10 stacks, and reduce the cooldown of lava lash by half a second. This one could actually be really good as like a 2-target cleave, where you put flame shock on 2 enemies. You would use Fire Nova in order to do damage to a bunch of them, like in a Mythic Plus scenario, with a little bit of this punchy damage with Sundering, and actually works out quite well. Let me show you kind of what that might look like. We're gonna go for some big damage here. Make sure that we are getting we should be getting Lava Lash and cooldown. That is something I didn't really do good at. And with Lava Lash, it also gives us lashing flames, where our main target is going to take more damage from our flame shocks. So this is something I would play maybe in Mythic Plus dungeons, especially if you're expecting like bosses where you're doing a little bit of cleave. Like for example, I could make sure these dots do more damage on both targets. So that's kind of cool. We're gonna make sure to re-flame shock here while the debuff lasts. But this seems like a really effective build. The amount of damage Lava Lash can do, especially when he gets a proc, is nuts. Fire Nova ends up doing quite a bit of AoE damage. Swap out Chain Lightning instead of Lightning Bolt on 3 or more targets. Crash Lightning would get even more value. Sundering would get even more value. And then each Flame Shock is also empowered because of the Lava Lash effect of lashing flames. So whoever's your main target, that will take more damage from the Flame Shock. So you could have like a fully themed build. And what's cool about Enhancement as well is the legendary for Elemental Shaman, where whenever you do fire damage, your next frost ability does more damage. Whenever you do frost damage, your next nature does more damage. And whenever you spit out a nature hit, your next fire spell does more damage. So the damage values are going to be 30% increase for frost, 25% increase for nature, and 20% increase for fire. You could make a very much an elementalist build. So I would go with Lashing Flames for this setup, because I think that'll be super effective. I probably would go Storm Fury. Normally you would go some like Ice Strike because, well, of course you would, because it will just give you so much value. I guess it's possible to also go Stormkeeper, but Sundering does proc the fire buff for Ice Strike, so I guess that'll be better. Hailstorm is what makes the bread and butter for this build, and I usually like Elemental Spirits because the spirits themselves, depending on the element, they do give different procs. Something cheesy you can do as a Shaman, which I don't think you'll end up doing, is when you pop one Fury Weapon, you actually gain the next fire spell will do 20% more damage. When you pop fire, your next frost spell will do 20% more damage. So you can do something cheesy like this as your Shaman if that's what you want to do. But this ends up being quite an effective build setup. In terms of the damage that it can do, it's really effective, especially in the cleave situation, since you're doing magic damage, almost like as if you're a caster. And it's quite nuts. Not every ability counts for nature damage or fire damage or physical damage, but quite a lot of it does though. So fire damage into lightning bolt, into nature damage, into, yeah, so you basically would have to get a rhythm for this. But the amount of things that are going on at once is kind of nuts, and now you're seeing a playstyle where your frost shock is doing the most amount of damage. So we had a build that was more fire related, we had a build that was more storm strike related, we had a build that was all about summoning ghost wolves as often as possible, and now we have a build where we are smacking the enemy with living hell that is the frozen wastes of Northwind with frost shocks. It is absolutely fantastic. There's 4 different builds, and there's probably even more combinations you can have in terms of the different themes as well as the different effectiveness or what these builds are core to. With Enhancement Shaman, And I think that's probably like the coolest part about the spec is just the amount of play here, the amount of playability. And imagine if all these builds did not work. I think it's just so hard to believe that if all these builds are bad, if not a single one of these builds is good in certain key situations, I find it really difficult to believe. Again, Blizzard tuning and whatnot is going to be important for this, for the success of the spec and all these builds, but there's just so many different playstyles with strengths and weaknesses, and you can take those different strengths into different fights and adjust and adapt based on any kind of encounter you may face. It's just so cool. That's another thing that I don't see a lot of channels talk about when it comes to YouTube and talking about classes, is talking about the longevity of a spec. And I guess if you really like the spec, there's a good chance you're going to end up playing it. But with Enhancement Shaman, I feel like what Blizzard has created with them has set up a situation where you can actually continuously play the spec, and you might even find other unique and creative builds as you continue to play the spec over time. I know we all talk about the viability and being the strongest possible spec that's going to be wanted by literally everybody. The most popular kid in school, invited to every single dungeon that you ever queue up. Everybody will want you front and center. I mean, nobody wants to be the last kid to get picked for dodgeball, but some of us want to be the first one to get picked every single time. And of course, those specs come and go. There's always this flavor of the month thing, which is something for you to consider. Do you want to play spec because it's genuinely fun for you, or is it more of a flavor of the month and you just want to have like the easiest, safest pick possible? I think when it comes to Enhancement Shaman, this is definitely going to be one of those classes where you have to take a bit of a gamble in terms of how good is it going to be, because nobody really knows how good and effective is it going to be, I think, until the game releases, and then we get to see the final version of Enhancement Shaman, how gear and legendaries and conduits work for it, and how different Covenant abilities are able to play into the spec's playstyle. But I found myself enjoying Enhancement, even though it does almost no damage on the beta in comparison to some of the other classes and specs. It has moments where it does shine, but not always. On the tuning side, it has been far lower than what many of us really expected for it to be. So hopefully Blizzard addresses it at some point in the near future. But the spec has been honestly a joy to play from the start to finish. It has been very enjoyable to check out some of the different builds, and I keep slamming my head against different trash mobs. But a lot of you guys ask me all the time what specs I like in order to maybe help you find the specs that you may enjoy, the playstyles that you may enjoy. And with Enhancement Shaman, I found it's one of those classes and specs that I have the easiest time jumping into dungeons, jumping into any kind of content, slamming my head against trash specs. Sometimes I'm at the bottom of the list, but I'm still having a ton of fun with it. So that's where I think I'm going to leave off with this video. Super excited to see where Enhancement is going to go. Cannot wait for the Wednesday update with the beta to see what other class updates they have. Hopefully Blizzard adds even more stuff into the game, especially when it comes to the class tuning and class abilities. But for now, I'll leave you off with this. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. Let me know what your thoughts on Enhancement. Let me know on some of the builds that you think. Is that something that could maybe get you to play the spec? Whether it is top tier, top meta pick, or is the top meta and being the meta pick for every situation is the only thing that matters to you? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in another one.